Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. If you have been following along for a while, you will know that I am a big animal lover, and that kind of translates in terms of my fantasy reading into someone who really loves animal companions and mythological creatures. And today's video is a celebration of my first love when it comes to mythological creatures, because I was undoubtedly a dragon girl. Actually a little bit sad because my daughter Juliet was obsessed with dinosaurs for a really long time when she was young, and it was a much deeper obsession than I ever had with dinosaurs. I had the usual childhood love of dinosaurs, but it never went to quite that extent. But she did not transition from dinosaurs to dragons. She went on to love unicorns, which is okay because unicorns are cool too, but I was just hoping to pass along that love of dragons. But my son, Isaac, is getting into the Dragon Master series, I think is what it's called, for young kids. So the hope is still alive that we may have another dragon lover in the family. What I wanted to do today is talk about some dragon books. And this is actually prompted by one of the books that I read this month that I haven't had the chance to talk about yet because we are not at the March wrap-up yet. And I wanted to talk about some books about dragons that some of them are pretty popular, some of them I think are a little bit underrated, and a couple of them are pretty new, so maybe you haven't had a chance to read them yet. And I wanted to talk about what they do with dragons specifically, what makes them a little bit unique, and what makes them really fun, and why I loved reading them. Then at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about a couple of dragon-related series that I have not yet had the chance to read, and then give you guys the opportunity to recommend some of your favorite dragon stories to me. Books that I'm not going to talk about today, but obviously are dragon books that I love. I just feel like I've either talked about them a lot or everybody talks about them. So obviously The Hobbit, Smaug was the first dragon of dragons for me. This is what started my love of dragons. The second series that actually propelled me from person who appreciated Smaug and The Hobbit to girl who is obsessed with dragons is a children's series that is called, I don't remember what the actual series is called, but I will pop a picture of it up here. It was about a little boy who rescued a baby dragon. So dragon hunting was big in their village. It was something that you kind of did to pass over from boyhood to manhood. And he sneaks after a dragon hunting party and then saves a baby dragon, who he then names Xantor, and then is taking care of this dragon throughout his life. So that was kind of the early reader series that got me into dragons. And then obviously we have A Song of Ice and Fire and Realm of the Elderlings and other dragon books like that that are super popular that I'm not going to talk about today, but obviously I really do love. The first book that I'm going to talk about is the one that kicked off the idea for this video, and that is a new release called The Keeper's Six by Kate Elliott. So this came out, I think it may have come out in February, but I read it this month. It just popped up for me at the library. And this is a novella. It is about, I think if I'm remembering correctly, maybe 160 pages-ish, but it might even be a little bit shorter. And it is really good for a number of reasons. So this follows a grandmother named Esther who has to go on a quest to save her adult son. So at the beginning of the novella, she gets this distress call from her son. He calls her, he has this really weird message. It's very cryptic. She doesn't really understand what he's talking about. And she goes over to his house to find that his partner and their children have been spelled into magic sleep. But she recognizes it as her son's own magic and realizes that something must have happened to him, and in order to keep his family safe, he put them in this kind of magical sleep so that they wouldn't wake up and then, have something happen to them as well. And so Esther, we find out, is actually on a kind of probation. She is not allowed to use her own magic for reasons that will come up later. But she kind of pushes those rules out of the way. She decides she's going to break the rules, try to get her old crew together to help her go and rescue her son. And so we follow the story, and it becomes kind of like a sci fantasy epic heist story where she has to go and rescue her son. And it is awesome because it centers around an older character, and specifically an older female character, which you don't get to see a lot in fantasy. And the story does something really cool with dragons. So the reason that I call this sci fantasy is because it has like some portal hopping. They live on Earth, Esther and her family, but they can take these magical portals that bring them from Earth to other planets. But in order to access these other planets or areas, you have to go through kind of like this in-between land. And there's a lot of danger that takes place out there, which is why only people who are magical should go out into this void. I don't remember exactly what they call it in the book, but it's kind of like this in-between. And so she goes out and she tries to find her son. And the way that dragons are incorporated into this world is that they are actually the like equivalent of mob bosses, essentially. So there's a big, I think they call it the consortium, where there are people in charge. And I guess the people in charge are actually dragons. And so you get to see dragons in that role where they hold a lot of power, that they try to distribute in a way that makes sense. And it's really, really cool, super interesting. It is a novella, and so just by virtue of being a novella, it is not going to work for everyone. I haven't read any of Kate Elliott's longer works, but I imagine that she is someone who must spend a lot of time on world building, because she spent a lot of time on world building in this small novella. So there can be some parts that feel a little bit info dumpy, because she truly put the amount of information that I feel like could flesh out an entire epic fantasy novel into novella format. It still worked really well for me. I really enjoyed it. I thought that the elements, like with the dragons, the magic, were super cool. I love following older characters, so I really enjoyed that part of the plot as well, or that part of the setup as well. And for me, it was just overall a really interesting read. I would recommend that you at least give it a try. Like I said, it does something really cool with dragons. I think that the main character is really sympathetic, and I just enjoyed the story. So if you're looking for something kind of family focused with a little bit of that like world building meat on it and a cool spin on dragons, then absolutely you should pick up The Keeper 6. The second series that I'm going to talk about is a little more popular, but it is very new to me because I have just started this series this year, and that is A Natural History of Dragons. So this is a pseudo biography, fantasy biography that is told from the perspective of an elderly lady named Isabella Trent. And she is reflecting back on her life and the discoveries that she made about dragons specifically that kind of propelled her or pushed her forward into scientific stardom. So she's writing to us from a place of affluence, of great respect in the scientific community, but she pulls us back to the beginning of her life in the first book, where she starts to fall in love with dragons, which is absolutely not a pastime that is appropriate for a young lady of good breeding. So we get to follow her as she stumbles into science, as she stumbles into making discoveries, and then we get to see her personality really shine as she starts to fight for what she believes in and fight for the right to be taken seriously in this field. Just like the first book that I mentioned, this is not something that's going to appeal to everyone. And that is obvious if you go and look at the Goodreads ratings. It seems like people either really like or really don't like this series, and I can see why. So I personally love natural history. I read nonfiction about it. I would read people's field logs about any animal that they were studying, and I would enjoy it. So listening, and I did this on audio because I think the audiobook narration is fantastic. Listening to Lady Trent tell her story, I thought every single word was fascinating. One of the complaints about this series is that people feel like it tends to drag, or the way that she's telling it, looking back in time, she'll sometimes drop hints about what was going to happen or what happened next. And some people feel that takes a little bit of the magic out of the discovery. But I like that. I enjoyed it. I know that she has reached a certain level of acclaim in her career, and I like watching it unfold and see what's happening. I do not read them for kind of heavy plot-driven reasons. Like I know that I'm not going to get like a rush of adrenaline as we reach the climax of the novel or anything like that. I'm just interested. I think that Lady Trent is so plucky, so funny, so determined, and I really like that about her. Another one of the criticisms that I have seen about this and that I can fully support is that there's also not a lot of intersectionality in terms of the feminism that is present in the book. Obviously, Isabella Trent is kind of plowing her own way for herself in this field, but it is a very narrow scope of, a very affluent woman. She still comes from a good family. She still has the means by which to conduct this research and, be able to go out and do things that would not be open to other women who are of a different class, of a different race. And the novel doesn't address that super well. I've only read up to the third book, so in the second and third book, there's at least more conversation around that and around the fact that Lady Trent tends to visit other people's countries without really appreciating what it means for her to go in and just kind of assert her will on this country and decide that she has every right and every privilege to be there. We get to see her fumbling through cultural customs and ceremonies that don't mean a lot to her, but she comes to understand that they mean a lot to other people. And I think as she reflects back, we're seeing that there has been a lot of personal growth on her behalf, and she recognizes how narrow her own worldview was when she was young and naive and kind of doing these things. So I do think that as the books go on, they have been starting to address some of those issues a little bit better. But in terms of enjoyment, your mileage may vary. I really like Isabella Trent. I feel like she is the kind of young woman in the first book that I felt like I could be. She is so determined. She loves dragons so much, and I just love hearing about her love of dragons. So to me, this is unlike any other dragon book that I have ever read, and I am loving the experience of reading it, / listening to it, and it's just been a delight. I cannot wait to listen to the next two novels. And I'm gonna be really sad when this series is over, because I think it is a series that was crafted specifically to match up with my tastes. I imagine every single one of the books in this series is going to be 5 stars for me, and I'm okay with that. I just love them so much. The third book that I'm going to talk about is one that I have mentioned a couple of times on the channel. I think I talked about it in one of my 5-star books that I never talk about videos. And it's a little bit of an older book, and it is, or was at the time, marketed as YA, but I think it's a little bit of a crossover novel between young adult and adult fantasy. And it's called Seraphina by Rachel Hartman. And this is a book that I picked up the year that I went to Comic-Con, which was in 2012. So it was over 10 years ago now that this book came out. And I love it. I will tell you, in my household, myself, my dad, and my husband have all attempted to read this book. I loved it. I think it's 5 stars. It is one of my favorite, if we're going to classify it as YA fantasy, it is one of my favorite works of YA fantasy. My dad read it. He absolutely loved it. Our taste tends to line up a lot of the time. He thought it was excellent, has read it and reread it. My husband picked it up, I think made it like half a chapter in and was like, this is too boring for me to ever read. I'm never picking it up again. So if you're a particularly like plot-driven reader who likes a fast-paced fantasy novel, Seraphina is probably not going to be for you. But if you like more slower paced, kind of character focused fantasy novels and you love dragons, then Seraphina might be for you. The premise of this story is that we are in a medieval fantasy world that is kind of coming to the end of 40 years of peace between humans and dragons. And dragons, I'm trying to remember, because it has been 10 years since I read it, I'm trying to remember if they can transform into like a humanoid shape or if they're always humanoid in shape. But they can at least appear humanoid, and they have very like mathematical and analytical minds. So since the peace treaty was signed, they have been responsible for a lot of the like mathematics related work, engineering related work, academia in this medieval land. And so the end of this like peace treaty, the terms of the peace treaty are starting to come up. And so tensions are high in the kingdom because the peace has been an uneasy one and people are wondering like what's going to happen when we have to re-sign the treaty. Enters Seraphina, who is the main character of the novel, who is harboring a deadly secret that she cannot tell to anyone. And she gets hired as a musician in the castle because she is a particularly gifted musician. And around the same time that she gets hired, there is a death in the castle, and it seems to have been carried out by a dragon. So Seraphina is kind of dragged into this mystery, and as the plot goes on, we start to find out some of the secrets that Seraphina has been hiding, some of the complicated politics that are kind of revolving around this upcoming re-signing of the peace treaty. And like I said, there's just a lot of character-focused moments. Like I said, loved this book. I loved the slow but like beautiful lyrical style of the writing. I really enjoyed the politics and the setup of the world, and I just loved Seraphina as a character. I thought that she was really easy to root for. I loved following her, and it was just a book, again, that I felt like was kind of made for me. The dragons in this book are really interesting. Again, they feel fresh and unique. There's something different about them that feels a little bit different from some of the classic dragon books that I loved as a kid. And if you find that your tastes line up with mine, then I would wholeheartedly recommend this to you, knowing that it's not going to be for everyone. This is another one. Books that I love always seem to have this, but this is another one that is really divisive on Goodreads. Like, people love it. Like, I mean, give it 4.5 to 5 stars, or they hate it. And they're like, I DNF this. I don't understand why anyone likes it. Am I reading the same book as everybody else? There, again, does not seem to be a lot of in between with Seraphina, but I absolutely love it. Fully endorse your choice to read it. You should go out and at least give it a try if you feel like your taste lines up with mine at all. So Seraphina is another one that I will give my wholehearted recommendation to. After that, we have a book that I spoke about briefly. I don't think it was last year. I think I read it the year before last, but it may have been last year. And that is Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hambly. So this is a book that I heard of because it's actually one of Brandon Sanderson's like formative fantasy books. It's one of the books that he read when he was young and really enjoyed. And I think is one of the books that he cites when people ask him, like, how did you get into being a fantasy author? What made you fall in love with fantasy? And it's this 80s fantasy novel that, again, centers around an older female character. So our main character in this book is named Jenny, and she is married, she has children, and she is a practicing witch. And the interesting angle of this book is that we follow Jenny, who's kind of at odds with her own identity. She's kind of got like parts of her pulled in different directions. So there's the part of her that is a wife and a mother and feels like she is a little bit resentful of that because she can't focus as much on being a witch. And she's a lot guilty about it because she feels like she's spending too much time as a witch to pay proper attention to her family. And then we have her, capabilities of a witch that have never lived up to the expectations that she had for herself or the expectations that her mentors had for her because she decided to get married and have a family. So I think it is a message that will definitely resonate with a lot of female fantasy readers who are in the position of being moms and also expected to work and just kind of trying to reconcile those parts of your identity. So I think it's a fantasy book that addresses a topic that doesn't come up a whole lot, which in and of itself makes it fairly unique, but there's also dragons, which is fun. The way that the dragon comes into this one is that Jenny and her husband John are living off on like their tiny homestead. They live away from any big cities. They're off on their own, so Jenny can practice her magic. And he was, in his past, a dragon slayer. So he has been celebrated, I guess, throughout the kingdom for slaying a dragon, and dragons have kind of gone into retirement. People haven't seen a lot of dragons since then. But unfortunately, at the beginning of the book, a dragon comes back and he's kind of holding the main capital city of the outlying country land. I don't remember if it's a kingdom, whatever it is, holding it hostage. And so someone comes looking for John the Dragon Slayer and wants to hire him or bring him back to slay the dragon. And what this person finds is not at all what he is expecting. The Dragon Slayer is not the person that he thought he would be, and Jenny, who is the witch, gets kind of like dragged along on their little quest to try to go and slay the dragon. I can't really say what makes the dragon character or what makes the interactions with dragons unique in this story because it's something that unfolds throughout the book and then especially comes to fruition at the end of the book. So it's not something that I can really chat about, but I can just tell you that it is an interesting spin. I really liked it. I enjoyed this book so much. It follows, like I said, an older female character. It talks about motherhood and fantasy in a really interesting way that you don't see a whole lot. And I think it's very much worth your time. And if you don't believe me, then you should believe Brandon Sanderson and take his advice because he also really likes it. And it's one of those like 80s fantasy novels that tends to get forgotten. So hopefully this will put it on the radar for some people. The book on this list that is definitely the most popular is the last one that I'm going to talk about, and that is Guards by Terry Pratchett. So this is the first book in the City Watch collection of the Discworld. Everybody knows what the Discworld is. Many people know that Guards is one of the best places that you can start if you're doing your Discworld journey, if you're just setting out on your Discworld journey. But what I didn't know until I started to read Guards was how dragon-centric it was. The main plot of this book does involve dragons in a really fun and quirky way. We get to see a character whom I adore, who really loves dragons and kind of puts their all into taking care of the dragons and making sure that they're safe, and the well-being of the dragons is a major part of the book. And the kindness that this character shows to dragons has huge plot repercussions, has huge, it indicates what's going to happen with the rest of the story, and it's just so good. I know that many people have probably convinced you to read Guards Guards or told you to read Guards Guards, given you lots of reasons why you should read Guards Guards, but I'm just going to add to that pile saying that if you are a dragon lover and you love dragons and stories and you want to see more of that, then you should absolutely read Guards Guards, because it has the perfect dragon subplot. And there's not a whole lot more that I can say about Guards Guards. I just really wanted to throw that one in at the end because it was an unexpected part of the novel that I absolutely loved. So you should go and read it and then come and talk to me about it for sure. Those are all of the books that I am going to recommend, but I do have a couple of dragon books that have been recommended either to me personally or just generally on BookTube that I would really like to check out. And the top two for that, one is the book Tooth and Claw, which I have talked about here before. I've talked about the fact that I want to read it. It's a little tiny book, maybe even a novella, that centers around dragons. I think the way that it's been pitched to me is if Pride and Prejudice were to happen, but the main characters were dragons. So I feel like it's kind of a social commentary on, you know, those kind of Victorian or, you know, that era, but with dragons as main characters, kind of Regency dragons. I don't know. I would love to read it. I am going to read it sometime this year. I believe I had it on my like 23 books to read in 2023. But even if I didn't, I've convinced myself that this is the year that I'm going to read it, because then if it's really good, I can tell everybody else to read it. The other series that I really want to try is Temeraire by Naomi Novik. So Naomi Novik is an author who, again, is very polarizing just in general. Many people loathe her book Uprooted, which I really, really like. Many people enjoy Spinning Silver, which I also enjoy. I liked both of the books by her that I read. But it seems like that polarization also kind of trickles over to the Temeraire series, which I believe is like the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons. And the people who don't enjoy it, the things that they tend to say is that it reads a little bit like YA instead of adult fantasy, and that the book is less about dragons in warfare and more about building a relationship with a dragon, which I feel like I would really like. The things that are maybe downfalls for other people are things that make me feel like I want to read this series. There is a like totally superficial reason for me want to love this series, and that is because the paperbacks that are in print right now all line up to show this like gorgeous picture of a dragon on the spines. So I want to read it and I want to love it because I want those books and I want to put them on my bookshelf. So we'll see. I really do want to read Temeraire. What I would love to know from anybody who is watching, if you have read the Temeraire series, or if you just started it and decided not to continue on, knowing what you do of my reading taste, do you think that I would like it? Do you think it is a series that I would enjoy? Because I would really like to read it, and I would really like to love it, obviously. But if people think that I will really enjoy it, it might encourage me to pick it up a little bit faster. But those are the two main dragon books that I have on my TBR that I have not picked up yet. I would love to get your recommendations. What are your favorite dragon books? Your first dragon book that you fell in love with reading? Dragon books that you also want to check out? Underrated gems that involve dragons? I would love to hear about any and all of them. I'm sure that most of us enjoy dragons at least to some degree, so I'm hoping for some good suggestions. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you with another one soon. Bye!